Greetings, and welcome to Beatles Stuffology, where two old friends sit around and talk BS, Beatles stuff, on a track-by-track basis, pretty much for the sake of it. My name is JG McQuarrie, and I'm here with my co-host, Andrew Deacon. Say hi, Andrew.
Hi, how are you?
I'm alright, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm sort of sitting here thinking that we are now heading into late 1964, which is a bit of an odd thing. I didn't realise we've sort of gone straight into subject matter there, but it's just kind of occurred to me that if we were to ask people about the big Beatles events of 1964, the chances are that most of them would come in the first half of the year. Well, should we say at least, up to maybe July?
That seems reasonable.
Yeah, you've got the whole sort of, number one in America, Ed Sullivan show, perhaps the run of shows in Paris where the recording of Hard Day's Night and the release in the summer, and then I suppose July, maybe into August, the Jimmy Nicol appearance on the world tour. But we don't tend to think of late 64 in those terms. So, good luck for us for hearty, exciting podcasting then.
Well, yes, exactly. It's time to tackle the Knackered album and do Beatles For Sale, which means we are kicking off with No Reply. It is kind of weird. I also don't really think of this as being like a 1964 album, even although I know that it is. And it does occupy that sort of weird sort of liminal space between like the more obviously kind of experimental and sort of growth spurt that Rubber Soul represents, and everything that sort of folds out from that, and the like the classic pop Beatles era that kind of sort of slightly ends with the release of A Hard Day's Night.
I mean, it's probably fair to say that the covers could have appeared on either of the first two albums. Really, I don't think there's any covers on there where perhaps they've sort of come along since and thought, well, maybe now we've got this particular audience, we can now do this. So
I find the covers in this album curiously backwards looking. They feel almost less advanced than some of the covers which are on earlier albums. It's a curious choice, but we will get to them and one in particular in the fullness of time.
Although it's probably worth saying at this point that we have kind of flagged our disregard for Mr. Moonlight. So that the challenge, dear listener, is for you to let us know. We're going to maybe sort of jump in early here and do that, where you can really get a hold of us. Well, you can do two things really. You can obviously contact us on any of these social media formats that JG is going to highlight for you in a moment. But actually also, if you feel like you can mount a sterling defence of Mr. Moonlight, or dare I say it, some of the other covers that are on this album, then get in touch and we'll have a little chat about whether or not you might want to come on and join us for a discussion in a segment that we're going to call, even though Andrew and JG think they're right, there's probably an argument that suggests that they're insufferable bores. We'll obviously work that up into some sort of pithy title, but please do get in touch and say, actually, do you know what? I've got tons I could say on this, and I'm gonna come on and defend Buddy Holly or Carl Perkins and these covers to the hilt. So, socials.
Yes, well, you can really get a hold of us at BeatlesStuffology at gmail.com, should email be your preferred method of communication. We are at Beatles_ology on Twitter. We have an Instagram. Have you worked out what our Instagram thing is yet?
It's Beatles Stuffology.
Okay, there you go. That should have been relatively easy for me to work out. We are Beatles Stuffology on Instagram, it says here. Get in touch. It would be lovely to hear from our dear listeners.
There you go. Absolutely. And any interactions that you want to offer, then as long as they're legal. Obviously.
Thank you for that caveat.
There you go. So I just chucked in the getting JG to run through the socials there, so I could check Twitter in that modern way. It gave me a brief moment where I could look at my phone. There you go. Right. Okay. No reply.
Yes.
This is a funny one, isn't it? What we've got here is a different way to open a Beatles album, because obviously, you've got Saw Us Standing there, it won't be long, and we've got A Hard Day's Night for the first three albums. But this actually seems to dovetail in more with I'll Be Back. It seems to be that if you were going to put I'll Be Back and No Reply, I'll Be Back being the last track on A Hard Day's Night, put that back to back with this, then there's some form of coherence. But it's not that big grand opening statement. It's more of a sort of a slightly world weary, oh woe is me, aren't I unsuccessful with the ladies type song. Not that Lennon's ever written one of those before, heaven forfend. So it's just odd that it's not that ball grabber that you might have otherwise had on Beatles records.
I quite like that, though. It does feel like they're trying to do something which is a little bit different, and the fact that it isn't the usual kind of big rock kind of opening is something that works in the album's favour. I mean, it's certainly thematically consistent with the majority of the material on the album. And I kind of quite like No Reply, because even though it's definitely not Lennon's first stab at Oh Woe Is Me, I like it for the fact that it feels genuinely sort of melancholy and wistful rather than bitter and resentful.
Which, let's face it, is the tone of a lot of the album.
Well, absolutely, and this sets the album up perfectly well. So it would be weird if this had opened with like Kansas City or like some big, I don't know, rock number that would try and sort of grab you, but it doesn't do that, and that's the right approach. And yeah, I like that atmosphere about the song. I like the fact that it's Lennon. If it is familiar material in terms of the content, it's not necessarily that familiar in terms of the delivery, and that wistfulness isn't something that we've seen all that much of from Lennon.
It's difficult to know what's on the album that could have worked as that kind of sort of normal opener. I mean, you sort of think that actually, in some respects, 8 Days a Week could have opened and closed and also gone in most of the other key positions on the album, because it's one of the more sort of traditionally power poppy type Beatles songs on there, whereas a lot of the rest of it doesn't have that same kind of feel, which is fine. That's not a criticism, because particularly the Beatles written tracks on this are still pretty darn good, and do compare well to an awful lot of the competition at this point in '64. But it is showing signs of weariness, and maybe that's why some of the lyrics, without wishing to get too much into the album, but some of John's lyrics in particular are very much of well, if I hang around, then everything's going to be a bit crap. So, I'll get my coat, and then you can all be happy without me. And that's fine. That's fine. That may be where he was at that stage in his life. But and the irony of this is that it was a song that he wrote on holiday, when he should have been really happy. But then clearly wasn't. It's a holiday that he went on with Cynthia and George and Patty, which is quite interesting, because they sort of have odd combinations, the Beatles, and I don't know if you're aware of this, odd combinations of who they go on holiday with. 1965, John's going to go on holiday with George Martin and their partners, which
feels like a really weird one.
It really does, bearing in mind, second episode running, I mentioned the 1971 Rolling Stone interview, where he just seems to be setting George Martin up as a know-nothing fool who ruined their creative abilities and so on and so forth, and has taken far too much credit for discovering the Beatles. That's fine, but it was written on holiday, and yet it has that kind of downbeat feel to it, which just seems a little bit odd. Incidentally, and I throw this in because we're talking about a song that we probably haven't got that much to say on, but the other week, myself and my own Cynthia / Patty were in.
Sure, should be thrilled by that description, by the way.
just sort of making, like, we were in well, I suppose northwest Wales. I was going to call it Snowdonia, but actually I don't want to call it Snowdonia because I know that the Welsh government has deliberately changed the name back, or rather is now promoting it under its Welsh language name, and I can't remember what that is, but it's, anyway, that will help to sort of, you know, pinpoint where it is in people's minds. And in 1958, and actually what you've got on the North Wales coast, down and then around to this part of Wales, are places where traditionally people from Liverpool and Manchester would have gone on holiday for large parts of the 20th century. And in 1958, George and Paul went on holiday there. Now this is, bear in mind, I think is slightly in that kind of, you've already used that liminal space reference, but in that liminal period where George is kind of in the band but not quite in the band, where he's been introduced, but, you know, maybe John's a little bit uncertain. But I like the fact that the two of them just go on this holiday, and, you know, it's been weird. Lots of people have been writing recently about the Beatles' mad day out in, I think, '67, where they wandered around London and had loads of pictures taken. But this sort of thing, it just strikes me as vastly more interesting, how two of them just travel on their own without really much preparation to Harlech on the coast of Wales, and, you know, going to camp in someone's field, but it's raining so much that they end up taking them in, and they get friendly with the family, so much so that you know, they end up playing in the band that one of them has in the pub that's down the road, and that house and that pub are still there. You can still sort of see them, and you know what. I mean, I just think it's really, really interesting to be able to sort of to walk around a very small town like that and think, I wonder what the teenage George and Paul made of this. I wonder how much they looked up at Harlech Castle and thought, wow, that's amazing, or whether they just thought, let's, you know, play on the guitar and try and sing some songs. So I wonder what they did on their holidays, which is almost the second Fairport Convention reference in a row as well, but we'll gloss over that at this stage. But you just think, you know, these are kids having fun away from their parents, you know, before they go to Hamburg. And so what did they do? Anyway, you know, I just find that kind of thing absolutely fascinating. And there are some, you know, interesting connections to that part of Wales, because just up the road is Portmeirion, which George in particular, well, actually, and Brian Epstein seem to really, really like. But what I don't know is at what point George fell in love with Portmeirion. I sort of got this sort of thought in my head that maybe it was on this trip that they took the train around the coast and just happened to sort of pop in, or whether it was later, after, you know, The Prisoner, that then he became aware of it. But there you go. So yeah, that's sort of just a kind of a little thought, because there aren't that many Beatles links to Wales. So when you come across them, you know, I think they're sort of, you know, they're interesting to have a think about, and especially with the teenagers that they were, about what they were doing to just become the adults that they did, and you know, it's quite a brave thing for a couple of kids relatively fresh out of school. In fact, George maybe just finished his O-levels at that point. I think, was he born in 42? I don't know.
I think it was 42, wasn't it?
Yeah, so they would have made him 16. But they obviously liked it so much that they went back the following year. And that's kind of where you can see stories about this in you know, the press, because apparently you know, McCartney they ran off with a duvet or something, and then he sent a letter all those years later paying them back for it, and that got auctioned off for, you know, a significant amount of money. But it was quite nice to go and to sort of see that this town that's relatively unchanged. There are a few kind of ghastly sort of or mid 70s, late 60s style buildings that now seem to be derelict, actually, but a lot of it is really kind of old. And you're just sort of looking at it and thinking, did they look at this too? Did they stand in this shop window? Did they go to this coffee shop? Did they walk up this street that's got a 40%, 37.5% gradient? Just sort of tickles me. Anyway, we're getting vastly off topic, and what I've done is now given JG a job of editing all of that down into something that makes some sort of sense. So,
well,
anyway.
that'll be delightful and something for me to very much look forward to. Just for the sake of factual accuracy, because if we are, if nothing, a factually accurate Beatles podcast, no, that's a lie. But regardless, February the 25th, 1943 is George Harrison's birth date. So,
right. Wow.
So 43, okay. Yeah.
Well, that's even more interesting then, isn't it? Because there's quite a lot of responsibility on Mr. McCartney to look after the young Mr. Lennon. But yeah,
the young Mr. Harrison.
That's the one. Yeah,
yeah.
We meant that
good.
too.
Right,
factual accuracy.
Sure. Factual accuracy. It's just what we do. Good. Yeah. Well, I have no idea what they got up to, but I agree. It's kind of fascinating to think about.
Yeah.
Anyway, this song that we're supposed to be discussing.
Yeah, you see, the other reason for sort of diverting into that is because this I mentioned the lyrics. That the lyrics are the extension of a theme when it comes to some of the things that John had written about. However, I don't for 1 minute believe that they are, that Lennon is doing anything other than replicating various songs that he's heard before. Silhouette is the one, But I did dive into Cynthia Lennon's book on John. I will admit, I downloaded it on the Kindle and I did a keyword search, but I did quite an extensive keyword search. And I couldn't find anything, because what I was interested in is what she thought about his lyrics and whether there was anything in his sort of self-pitying, women don't like me kind of lyrics, or, that piqued an interest in her. But I cannot find any references whatsoever to it. So, it's all a bit odd. And yeah, I don't know. I'm losing enthusiasm even now. There you go. More editing for you to do.
Thank you very much. I always appreciate the opportunity to refine my skills. It's a funny song, though. I mean, I do quite like it, but I just don't know how much there is to say about it, which is a bit limiting on a podcast where that's what we do. But it's a very simple song as well. It's just a very small handful of chords. They are almost all major chords. There's three minors, A minor, E minor, and D minor. Everything else is major. There's not even like bluesy sevenths in there. It's just a very simple, straightforward structure. And that's fine. I guess it's sort of telling a story. I know that's one of the things that the lyric gets praised for, is that it's like a complete piece. I think it was Dick James said to Lennon that that whole thing. I don't want to just repeat well-known anecdotes, but
Dick James is another one that John Lennon massively criticises for talking about how influential he was over in the success of the Beatles.
Yes, well, I may have more sympathy with Mr. Lennon when it comes to that opinion than I do with the George Martin comment. But it's. I mean, it's fine. It's definitely it's of a piece, let's say, of itself, and that's okay. It's a fairly coherent lyric. It makes sense. Yes, it's slightly self-pitying, but like I said, I enjoy the fact that it's melancholy rather than bitter. But again, there's not an awful lot of there. It is what it is. There's not a great flourishing of images. There's not a great sort of tonal variety to it. It's just kind of there. I think it is a relatively effective album opener. I know we were talking about this earlier on. I think it does work, but at the same time, is it too much to call it a slight piece of work? I don't know. If that says more pejorative than I kind of mean it to be. If slight is the adjective, then that's maybe harsher than I want it to sound. But so
it's another one for me, much like She's a Woman, where a little bit of editing and a little bit of thought and going over things could have made this a significantly, more interesting and more powerful song. And with She's a Woman, it's that opening couplet. And here again, it's the lyrics, because, you sort of wonder if he'd taken the opportunity to sort of step back and think, okay, well, let's have a look at these lyrics as a whole. He might have realised that there's a slightly stalker vibe going on with this.
I very much doubt that would have occurred to him at any point.
No, okay, but there's something about I know I talk a lot about lyrics and talk about how the lyrics don't really matter, but then sometimes they do. Even when he's talking about the fact, I guess he talks, the only lyrics that he really seemed to like were those first person ones that were particularly meaningful, and he didn't particularly like narrative lyrics. And this is a story. He's trying to tell a story about this person who, anyway. But what I don't get is you sort of get that feeling in the lyrics that this person feels that love is some sort of competition. That just because he loves her more, he should get to win the woman. And you think, well, it doesn't quite work like that. I found, his love sounds obsessive and needy. And if that's loving more, then maybe it's a good idea to be with someone who's kind rather than someone's obsessive. And I think that was the thing that made me wonder, about whether Cynthia, an intelligent woman with artistic integrity herself, what she thought about it. Because we're going to get into very soon a whole batch of lyrics where Lennon is going to talk about, a bit more personal, inspired by Dylan, trying to tell a bit more about me, and so on and so forth. So therefore, obviously, some people are going to find it difficult to separate out those lyrics from these lyrics, and some people are going to ascribe more meaning to these lyrics than is actually there. But even then, be a little bit self-editing. Go back and sort of think, right, okay, well, maybe we could update this. And admittedly, this isn't a song that's played anywhere near as much live as She's a Woman, but She's a Woman being played so much live that there's perfect opportunity to edit lyrics. But then you get into that whole sort of space about obsessive, rabid fans complaining when lyrics are actually changed by bands. So I don't know what point I'm trying to make here. I think I'm trying to make several, and I think I've probably forgotten what they were. Anyway, over to you.
Okay, good. I will praise the I don't think it's technically a middle eight, but the break, whatever the correct term for that is, which I think is great. I think that's the bit of the song where it really sparks to life. It's some very good harmony work, and it has a real sense of direction to it. Again, lyrically, it's as you were saying, it's maybe not the maybe not the strongest of it, but like the delivery steps up as well. I think Lennon really improves the way that but again, that's also slightly unusual because there's a real power to that section, and then it kind of fades back to the more sort of melancholic edge for the final kind of chorus, or final verse rather, and that's also quite unusual. Lennon doesn't tend to variegate his delivery in that kind of way. He tends to sort of start, you get what the song is, and then stop, and that's it. It's a nice kind of piece of tonal variety. And again, if it doesn't feel like a revelation, which it's not, it still feels like he's kind of questing a way forward. It's giving him an additional texture that he can add to the song.
Please, sir, I have a question, sir. Lennon doesn't what his lyrics very often?
It doesn't variegate.
Okay, what?
Well, he doesn't vary the way that he delivers the lyrics all that much. He tends to sing, like, if a song is angry, it's angry all the way through. If a song is a love song, it's a love song all the way through. But here it starts kind of very melancholic, then it comes up to this kind of much more kind of impassioned middle section, then it fades back down to the melancholy again.
That's fine. I've just got a new word to look up afterwards.
Okay.
I'm going to try and fit it into conversation later. Because we're a household of English teachers here, dear listener. So I'm going to see if Mrs. Household English Teacher is also aware of this word later.
So hang on, she's your Patty Stroke and Mrs. English Teacher. Yeah, wow.
Yeah, and also my Sidney Poitier.
Okay,
if you like. Was he an English teacher into Sir with Love? I don't know. But I'll just leave that image there. Michelle Pfeiffer, maybe. Moving on. Right.
Yes.
Okay. No, I was just genuinely interested because anyway, I'll tell you what I've written for that middle eight. I'll read the exact notes that I made. Middle eight is fine. Hyphen hand claps. Hyphen it builds and has some backing vocals. I think, and I've put I think because actually there's a lot of double track on most of the rest of the song. So I'm sort of assuming that actually that sounds a little bit more like there is some something going on there, which I think neatly summarises what you were saying there.
But in a substantially less pretentious way.
Yeah, that's fine. Hand claps. Got to mention the hand claps. Love a bit of hand clapping. And, I might, sort of jokingly from time to time make sort of slight digs at the lyric writing of Noel Gallagher, for example. However, one thing that he really, really likes when recording that I have to say, I agree with, is real hand claps on tracks. I think it makes a massive difference. I think it's good that they're putting something in that is a little bit different, that adds something, a little bit of depth to what's going on.
Absolutely. No, it does. It really does add something. For what it's worth, a hasty check of complete Beatles recording sessions suggests McCartney is doing some backing vocals there. So yeah, there is a lot of double tracking, but it looks like McCartney contributed backing vocals there also. But yeah, no, I agree about the hand claps. It's such a simple thing, but it just makes that difference. It adds that little extra spark. It's hand claps are no cowbell, but they're still better than nothing.
I mean, it's worth mentioning the vocals on their own here as well, because if we sort of backtrack to where we're talking about this opening the album, of course what we get is a double track vocal opening for a few beats before the instruments come in as well. So it's quite a substantially different opening. It's something that obviously they're going to go on and do more often. I suppose the example that springs to mind will be Nowhere Man, for example. But it's good, even if it's just like a brief moment, that they are trying something different. But I have to ask you here, because I realise that I'm not the greatest fan of a lot of early Lennon vocals. What did you make of his singing on this track?
I generally quite like it. I think it's, again, surprisingly soft for Lennon, and I find that to be quite a good fit for his voice. The way that he delivers that line, "That's a lie," that's a lovely little delivery for him. It almost sounds like he's being sly when he sings it, but it's a very unusual sort of way that he voices it, if you will. I like it, and the fact that it's got that restraint on the verse means that he's got somewhere to go with his voice when it gets to like the more impassioned like middle eight, and that's also, I think, an indication of the way that he is developing as a singer, because he has that extra in reserve. He's not going at it like flat out, and it would be quite easy, I think, to do that first verse angry or bitter and have Lennon kind of going at full pelt all the way through it, but that's not what he does, and so I really like his delivery on this. Okay. I think it works extremely well.
So that's quite interesting, because again it's another indication about how two people can hear the same thing and come up with something slightly different, because I think, and this may be the double tracking, but to me it sounds like he's trying to sneer. It sounds sort of a bit sneery and antagonistic, but then we know, don't we, that Lennon's accuracy when it comes to double tracking is not always the sort of swathed in 100% accuracy.
That's fair.
Yeah, but I think this is one of those songs that gets more interesting the louder it gets. I saw the light kind of section of it, where you feel that there is that little bit more emotion, and there's a little bit more a few more interesting things happening in terms of the way that they put it together, because I'm intrigued by this song in many ways, because it's one that originally they tried to pass off on Tommy Quickly, and then it appears on this album as the album opener, which is still like prime position So kind of thinking about what it was that made them think that it was something that would be okay to pass off to someone else, and what changed their mind, and poor fool Tommy Quickly for rejecting it.
Yeah, I have no idea what made them change their mind. I think it's instructive to listen to the Anthology version. There's two versions of
Yeah.
on Anthology, one of which is pretty much as is, but the structure is slightly different. And then there's another one which is a much more sort of got a much more sort of cha 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 kind of beat to it, which is a weird sound for this song. It doesn't fit it at all. But that clearly gets scrapped at one point, and it becomes this sort of more melancholy ballad, which is a perfect fit for the song. And I don't think that that's just like frequency bias that I've heard like this version obviously much more than the Anthology version. I think it just is better, and it sounds to me like they had tried it in a different style. Maybe it hadn't quite worked, and then they've gone for this. So if the version that the Right Honourable Mr. Quickly was offered maybe sounded a bit more cha-cha, or maybe a bit more kind of end of the pier, maybe that would have been something that would cause it to be rejected. But by the time the Beatles actually put more time into it, and then they refine it back to this, it's a bit more sophisticated in the final version. That gives the song somewhere to go, and it's that thing about spending a little bit more time just finding a little bit more nuance in it, and that seems to have been the case with this one.
I think there was a suggestion that I think on Anthology, I think one of those versions, maybe it's that one, it is meant to be the version of the song that Tommy Quickly rejected. But I think I read somewhere that he has said that the version that he rejected didn't have the middle eight at that stage, and the version on Anthology does. So maybe there is another version that's kicking around somewhere. But I mean, Tommy Quickly's not someone that I know too much about, but I did go and have a little bit of a listen, and he doesn't really sound like the kind of singer who would suit this song. So I think it's probably not a bad decision for him. And obviously not all artists who covered Lennon-McCartney songs had great success with them. But I mean, he sounds like he's more of a Tommy Steele type singer than someone who would be singing this kind of rock and or pop.
Yeah, it's a curious choice. I can't say that I'm sorry if we have a lot of Tommy Quickly fans listening to this podcast. I can't say that I particularly warmed to him much as a performer. But maybe that's unfair. It was a very cursory listen, so I don't want to lean too hard on that. But yeah, you're right. He like that. Tommy Steele is a perfect comparison. That's exactly kind of the material that he would be delivering, and so maybe this just wasn't right. But it's his loss is our gain. Let's say it that way. I think it would have been a shame to lose this song to slightly obscure '60s artist rather than have it here. And whatever else, I think when they did finally get the song together, they got it together. It sounds really, really good, and it does have enough to. Well, I was going to say, it has enough to justify its place as the album opener. Do you think it does justify its place as the album opener?
Well, I was just going to say, actually, I think Adam Faith is the other singer that Tommy Quickly reminds me of. And
fair enough, yeah.
And even with the name like Tommy Quickly, he sort of fits that Adam Faith, Tommy Steele type kind of naming conventions.
Yeah.
Apologies to Adam and Tommy if those are actually their real surnames. Never mind. Billy Fury, for example. Anyway, yeah, I mean, it works. It sets the tone. You're not going in with too much of a high, but it's more a case of, and I think this sort of links in with why they revisited this. Links in the fact that they're tired, that they've produced so much music in such a short space of time, that they're then having to put together a new set of songs relatively quickly so they can get another album out before Christmas. I mean, that's a difficult schedule to fulfill. So therefore, you are perhaps going to be looking into the scraps of paper you've left down the back of a sofa, or those old teenage notebooks to see if there was a lyric that you wrote while you were bored at the back of Mr. Simpson's chemistry class. To see if there's anything there that you can revisit. So I don't think we should be too surprised that something that like this that they've revisited becomes a prominent part of the album, because we're going to find that a lot, aren't we? Is it McCartney's "I'll Follow the Sun," for example, something that he wrote in about 58 originally. So there's all that kind of stuff going on, but they've made a good enough version of it, and if the Tommy Quickly version didn't have a middle eight, well, actually, we've both said that the middle eight is something that really works on this. So
Yeah, it's the best bit.
That's added. I mean, certainly in terms of Beatles mythology, the more you read about it, the more McCartney interviews that you read, the more Lennon songs came to him without a middle eight. He says, "Oh yeah, my bit's the middle eight," and that was the bit that really made the difference with the songs. And you go, okay, all right, fair enough. We're in McCartney land, just like there's Peter Buck land, and I suppose Lennon land as well, where you just sort of shrug your shoulders and go, fair enough.
Sure.
If that's what you remember, not a problem. I'm happy to go with it. So it works because it's one of the better tracks on the album. Whether it's one of the better Beatles tracks, yeah.
For slight sidebar, I think Relatively Quickly is a great name for Tommy Quickly's best of compilation. That's definitely
works on so many levels.
Exactly. I'm so sorry. It's good as far as it goes. This one, that's pretty much.
So, dear listener, you've hung on about 30 to 35 minutes, depending on how much of my waffle in this episode JG has edited out, for us to come to the conclusion that it's perfectly okay as far as it goes.
Exactly. I hope you feel your time has been well spent, and we look forward to spending it with you again. Right, let's give this a score, unless you've got something else that you want to add to it.
No, that's fine. No. I mean, it's very much on a par with some of those side 2 Hard Day's Night type songs, and She's a Woman. So we're going to give it a smothering 6.
A smothering 6 from you. Yeah, that's fair. I think I'm going to give it a 6.5 though, just to be an arse.
There's other things you can do to be an arse.
Well, that's true, but I'm going to go with this one for the time being.
Okay.
Yeah, it's good. I like it. It's not.
You're doing it again.
I am, right. All right, bugger this. Let's just get out of this whilst we still can. Right, you can really get a hold of us. You can contact us by email. We are BeatlesStuffology@gmail.com. We are on Twitter @Beatles_ology. And as I have just discovered, we are Beatles Stuffology on Instagram. You can find my blog at www.jgmcquarrie.scot, and you can find Andrew's writing at www.stuffology.co.uk. Please also check out my other podcast, Talking Trek to You, where a noob and an alleged expert, which is me, go through the original Star Trek series episode by episode. Please, if you have the opportunity and time, and it really takes no time at all, to like, rate, and review us on whatever podcatcher you are using, so that other people can find the show. Next episode, we carry on through the album and we hit I'm a Loser. And as always, we hope you're going to join us for it. But until then, keep listening.